Hey, Church of the Lakes, time for our weekly Bible study. Let me take a moment and say Happy 4th of July. It's a great weekend for us to remember those that have gone before us and give us the freedom. As I sit here on a street curb in our downtown city with no fear of any kind of persecution or anything else, a lot like what we've been studying as far as the early Christians. And so just grateful for this day. I just want to remind you that even though you can watch CNN and Fox and MSNBC and all of them and get a little jaded about this country, I still believe it's the greatest country on earth. I still believe that God has blessed us and give us freedom and rights. And when He does that, it's usually because we have a responsibility. So just want to remind you of that this morning and say Happy 4th of July. Spend some time with your family. For those of us guys that have a hard time shutting down because we have so much work to do, shut it down, turn it off, turn off the phone. If I call you, don't answer. Just spend some time with your family. So we're going to jump into Acts chapter 25 if you've got your Bible. And I just want to take a quick review to help us get our brain back into the story. At this point, Paul has become a political hot potato. The whole game, hot potato, past the potato. And that's really what's going on with Paul. If you kind of look back through the last few chapters, he's been passed from leader to leader to leader, and nobody wants anything to do with it, and they want to please the Jewish people that are coming against him. The Jewish people don't have any legal, valid arguments, so nobody can side with them, and yet the Roman leaders want to appease the Jews because they try to keep the peace and all the politics. So Paul is a hot potato, and he's caught right in the middle of a political game. And how frustrating when you think about that. You think about all this time he's had to go up and defend himself again, and then get put in prison, and then defend himself again and get put in prison. And I just, especially for somebody like Paul, somebody who has the personality, and man, do I relate to this big time. But somebody who's got thoughts of I need to do this and I need to do that and I want to get up and go do this. At this point, Paul is going to sit there in prison for 2 years. Since our last chapter, since the end of chapter 24. It doesn't tell us this, but when you do the research, there is a 2-year gap in that little margin in between 24 and 25. And what actually happens is, if you remember, there was leaders that were. He went before. Festus was one of them. Felix was one of them before. Felix is gone. Felix is no longer the leader. He's during this time period, and now we're going to get this new leader called Festus. And so Festus has gotten put into leadership now. Completely different people. We talked a little bit about Felix having been a slave and a prisoner, and the fact that he didn't have the greatest background, so he probably had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and that kind of made him deal with in certain ways with the way he led. Well, Festus is the complete opposite. Grew up in a noble family, kind of has the right, was probably went to prep school, like he went to Montverde Academy or like, what is that, Lake Hyman Prep or something in Orlando. Anyway, he kind of went to the prep school, and the reality is he's a whole different person. Pretty cool character, pretty calm character in all this. But I can't get past the fact of thinking about Paul sitting there for the last 2 years, and just the frustration. I mean, you got to think he's wanting to go check on the churches. He's wanting to go see if God wants him to launch other churches. I mean, his life has been out there. But what happens is they put him on house arrest, but they give permission for people to come and go. So during this time period, there's a lot of discipleship going on. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I think probably happened when you do a little bit of the research is that Luke would come and spend time with Paul. And there's probably several of the stories that we have a better or clearer picture of in Acts, because you remember Luke is writing this down, because Luke had the opportunity to sit down with Paul, and Paul couldn't go anywhere. It wasn't like Paul was trying to run to the next city and do this like he usually was, but he had this audience to be able to say, hey, clarify this story for me. So it hit me, we are the beneficiaries. In other words, we have some of the stories and the clarity of some of the stories, possibly because of this time period. And Paul would have never known that. He would have never understood that. He might have said, well, I hope one day that people might read this and have more clarity because Luke and I sat down. So the lesson there, before we even start, that I thought is downtime. There are these times in our lives when it feels like nothing's going on, or we're waiting for whatever it is. And us as Americans, we have a tendency to always be, well, when this happens, when I get this, right? And everything's about this waiting game, instead of recognizing that God may have a very distinct purpose for the downtime. So before we even get into looking at the chapters, I want to encourage you that if that's you, if you're in a downtime, if you're waiting for that next thing, God is doing something. And maybe you should spend less time praying for that thing to happen and just pray for God's will and say, God, what do you want to happen today that I'm missing because I'm focused on tomorrow? And so downtime. Just consider if that's you that you do that. So let's jump in. Chapter 25 says, Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. So talked a little bit about him. And so he's the noble guy. He's got the background. So he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. So he goes to Jerusalem, and basically what he's going to do is shake hands and kiss babies, right? It's the political moment. He's the new politician. He's going to go to the Jews, shake hands, make nice, do all this sort of stuff. Verse 2. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul. The way that's written just makes me laugh because it's like, hi, I'm Festus. I was the dude. Hi, nice to meet you. And they go, yeah, let's talk to you about Paul. Like, okay, can we just have a little, can we have something to drink and something to eat and maybe get to know each other a little bit? But the man laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem because they were planning to ambush to kill him on the way. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Do you remember a few chapters back? There were 40 men who weren't going to eat, and they were going to kill until they killed Paul. They weren't going to eat. So I have a question. I wonder if they ate or not yet, because Paul's still alive. But the other reality is, when you think about this, this is substitute teacher behavior. Do you remember when there's a substitute teacher, or your kids when there's a substitute teacher? Everybody's going to push the envelope, right? Everybody's going to see how far they can go. So it's almost like when you think about it. It's been 2 years. So these guys have not let this go in 2 years. One of their very first thoughts, maybe it's not the very first conversation, but it's right up there. One of their very first thoughts to talk to the new leader is, well, let's talk to him about Paul, and we're going to ambush. It's been 2 years. Somebody get up and get over it. You know what I mean? But anyway, so this is substitute teacher behavior. How far can we push? What can we do? What can we get him to do? Verse 4. Festus replied that Paul was being kept in Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about this man, let them bring charges against him. Right? He kind of shows his training here, and that although he's the new guy, he's no substitute teacher. He has training. He knows the law. He says, okay, everybody calm down. We're going to do this proper. We're going to do this according to the book. So if you want to do that, you can come, bring charges in the proper way. Verse 6. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. So got a picture for you to see. But Caesarea, if you remember in some of the study, Caesarea was a nice place. It was a cool place. It was originally built kind of to be a relaxing vacation. It's this gorgeous. It's right on the sea, and so he goes back, and it's almost like he goes back to the vacation place and says, "Okay, well, just bring him, and I guess I'll listen to your case or whatever." Verse 7. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Underline. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews nor against the temple. And then this one he adds, this is a new one, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, here we go, wishing to do the Jews a favor. Now we're back to politics. Up until this moment, it seems like he was going to be legit by the book, but he's wishing to do a favor. So he's trying to figure out, how can I appease everybody? Great politician, right? Great, want everybody to be happy. Said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done nothing wrong, as you yourself know very well. Calls him out a little bit. If there I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there's nothing to the charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Big moment there, big statement, Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you will go. Paul is brilliant. The dude just, to appeal to Caesar, and really a lot of it is the way we've come to understand legal issues in our culture today. Basically what he just said was, I'm not happy with the lower court's thoughts. I'm going to appeal to the appeals court. So it's the same sort of a system that we have in the United States, that because he's a Roman citizen, he has rights to be able to appeal to the next court. And so he says, okay, you're going to go. The thought that I just had here, in our day, when we are becoming a less and less Judeo-Christian society, as a matter of fact, we are no longer a Judeo-Christian society. It's not the normal. As a matter of fact, I think that's why so many Christians are freaking out about politics, is because for the first time ever in our culture, we are the minority. And we don't like that. And that's tripping us out, and we don't know how to act in that. But let me just say to you, God's got this. Don't freak out. God is still sitting on his throne, and none of this has surprised him. And so we need to just be excited, because you know what? God's church is going to rise up and be who God's called us to be. Light shines best in the darkness. Right? So we need to not fret and worry about that, but we need to be wise, as Paul was here, to understand the political and legal issues of our culture. And so, for example of that, in our church, in our bylaws, we've added several things in our bylaws to deal with marriage, sanctity of life, those type of things, because we've understood the legal issues and how the legality works within our culture. So, ranting and raving about it is really not going to get us anywhere. But empowering ourselves and getting the knowledge to understand what our rights are and how to deal with it, and that's what Paul does. I just think there's a message there for us today in our culture to say, you can't just keep railing against things. You also have to do your homework and understand the culture of the day and understand your rights and how that may work, that we can answer and be prepared to do this, even if we got to a point where we were persecuted. But if you understand the culture and you understand the legal rights of the culture, then you know how to use those to your benefit. That's what Paul did. Verse 14. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accuser face to face and had opportunity to make defense concerning the charges laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charges in this case of such evil as I supposed. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion, about a certain Jesus who was dead, but whom Paul asserted to be alive. Here's what's awesome. Festus, raised up in a noble Roman home, probably has very little background with the way or Jesus followers. But in this moment, he sums up the key to all Christianity. In this statement, you know what he makes the number one most important issue? The resurrection of Jesus Christ. That he understands that they're saying that there's issues with Jesus, and Paul is asserting that he's alive. So in this moment, this Roman, secular, pagan, whatever category you want to put him in, individual basically isolates out the issue, and the issue is the resurrection. Because the reality is if the resurrection never happened, then I am wasting my time sitting here talking about this book. If the resurrection never happened, if there was some way to prove without a shadow of a doubt that that never happened, then we all need to go eat, be merry, and die. Because that is the crux of the reality that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, conquered death, that we might have life. Right? And so in this one moment, he just isolates that exact point about Christianity. Verse 20. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to keep in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held in until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself tomorrow. He said, you will hear him. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp. Let me stop for a second and re-put your brain into the right concept here of who Agrippa is. So Agrippa and Bernice, this is King Agrippa and his girlfriend/sister, Bernice. Yes, you heard me correct. And this family, the Herod family, is one of the craziest families. Like, you could almost say Herod family, Manson family. Their background, you start going back through it. Herod the Great, who was the great grandfather of this King Agrippa, is the one who tried to kill Jesus by killing all the babies. That was him. His father is the one who killed James and then imprisoned Peter, and then his uncle is the one who killed John the Baptist. So this is the Herod family. As a matter of fact, Bernice became his girlfriend after divorcing her uncle. So I just want to kind of put it in your brain who they are, what these families are like. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, and they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in, and Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man with whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me. The whole Jewish people, right? Petitioned me. Again, man, how hard is that when you get into a situation and somebody makes an accusation and you go, whoa, that's not right. That's not true. You know, that happens to us all the time, and we see it happening to Paul. They petitioned me both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death, and as he himself appealed to emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Therefore, I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indict the charges against him. So we're going to pick that up next week, because this is just the first part of the story. So let's look at a few takeaways just from this week, and then next week we'll carry on the story. Number one is the downtime. What you do with your downtime is extremely, extremely important. It's called downtime. It's not called wine time. It's called downtime. It's not called complain time. It's called downtime. It's not called fantasize time. Well, one day when, and when this, right? There's a reason that God has you in a downtime right now. He either wants you to slow down and focus on something. He's either chipping away at something in you, or he's developing something that he can use in the future. So if you're in that downtime, just maybe take a breath and stop this week and say, okay, God, why do you have me in this? What do you want me to learn? Whose life do you want me to touch? How can I use this to not just complain and think about one day, but to live what it is you want for me today? When we pray the Lord's Prayer, he says, give me this day our daily bread. So what today, God? What do you want me to do? Number two is there are a lot of theological arguments that we have in Christianity, and even if you got together a number of churches right here in Leesburg, you would get a bunch of theological arguments. One thing that we can't argue about, one thing that is a constant, that's a reality, that's just a done deal, is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Either he rose up out of that tomb, or we are wasting our time launching a church in his name. And so the reality is there's a no-brainer there. The reality is I believe to the core of my being that Jesus Christ came in a physical body, could have sat here in this chair next to me, could have put his hand on my shoulder and talked, had lunch down at Bloom's or Southern Gourmet or Turner's or one of the little restaurants down here downtown. He died in a brutal death in your place, put in a tomb, but then he rose up out of that tomb. And he lives today, and he lives that you might have life, and as we like to say, life to the full, right? John 10:10. Third takeaway of the day is you never know what audience your trials are setting up. What I mean by that is, imagine if today I told you, okay, a year from now, you're going to have the opportunity to sit before Governor Rick Scott and a whole bunch of dignitaries in Florida and tell your story. And you might be like, well, that doesn't even sound real. That doesn't even sound crazy. Well, did Paul ever think that he would stand before King Agrippa in this gorgeous place in Caesarea with the sea behind? I mean, it's just beautiful with the sea out behind and the amphitheater and all that was there in Caesarea. Did he ever think that? But it took the trials, it took the challenges he had to get him to the place that he might have that audience. So I just encourage those of you that are going through a trial right now, there's a chance that you're going through a trial because you actually don't understand the audience that God is setting up for you to tell your story, to be the witness that God's called you to be. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you again for how rich. Every time we open your book, it is a living document that we can learn more and understand you more, understand ourselves and our purpose. Help us to go out and be the church. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.